Guten Abend from Deutschland. I'm traveling internationally. This is Renaissance, where messes are still signs of life. All right, so we're going to talk about outliers, and this was influenced or kind of, basically I got some feedback in person and as well as on my post with that little hack with the phone and the clips. And that's a whole separate discussion of analysis and thoughts and findings and feelings and beliefs and what I sense and ultimately will assume risk on. But with that, I went down this rabbit hole of like really digging into outliers. So what are outliers? Well, the way I would define those are data points that may not belong. I want to place an emphasis on may not belong. I'll kind of get into that. So essentially, and feel free in the comments to kind of be like, oh, nope, you're spot on, or nope, you are far from center, but we have a population or a sample of a population, but essentially we collect data, right? And so it goes down, boom, and we process it, and we get like these results or findings. So we go from like raw, crude data down to something that's a little bit more usable, has utility, and we get these things called so-called inferences or the like. And then, so we get those data, so we're like, all right, this all kind of makes sense over here, but then we got this outlier over here. And then it essentially lies at a normal distance from other values, from a shape, or excuse me, a sample and or a population. And then I'm like thinking like, all right, well, if it doesn't belong, then what? Like, why is this little guy or gal, why are they the outlier? Or let's reframe our question, let's reframe our problem set now to try to understand the outlier, the outcast, if you will. And I would like to frame it, well, it's like, what if the other data points, right, are supposed to be as that data point out here, that outlier? Then what? So it's just, I like to kind of reframe things differently just to kind of be a little more intuitive and kind of challenge the status quo. Now, we're not going to go into hypothesis and null hypothesis and stuff here, but this is kind of figurative to, I think, just more than statistics. So with that, I would argue that a data set, it captures, in simple terms, like some occurrence, event, whatever, a variable or a set of variables, depending if it's just one variable or multivariate, like what's going on in space and time, if you will. And so with that being said, I'm also thinking like, well, how many data sets does an individual belong to? And I don't know how your guys bring it, but that just immediately starts to fry me, because just think about that in like dimensional terms or beyond. Because we talk about there's multiple dimensions. So right now we're kind of bringing it back in. We're talking about outliers. So we process it through the collection, find our inferences, and boom, outlier. And then I'm like, all right, well, in typical statistics, like we're trying to prove something, right? But in real life, like if you find yourself as the outlier, outcast, like does that mean you really are one, or does it mean when you were caught or the data was collected, what state of being were you in? What was going on? Do you typically fall into that data set, or do you just don't, and that's okay? Or should they all be like you? And I would argue too, you could have multiple data sets, and then you kind of correlate and collaborate and whatnot. Or is this little guy or gal or thing able to adapt, morph, change, grow, take your verb in terms of changing and adapting to fit the model? So ask yourself or challenge, how many data sets do you belong to? Don't burn yourself out. And then with that, like those data sets, like when you actually start to like comb into it and scrape into it, like what are the variables? You have time, space, matter. It's really infinite, especially when you're looking at data collection, the processing of the results, and then really like, typically data is used for research, right? Like what are they trying to achieve? Because data can be manipulated, unfortunately. So what I've learned through my times and trials is like, what's the null hypothesis, right? And then essentially someone's trying to prove something or disprove something. So the outlier is not always bad. In fact, being the outlier sometimes is a good thing. And sometimes you might not fit into a data set in that moment, but it doesn't mean you are completely an outcast. Sometimes it's a matter of finding your peeps or, whatever have you. And so I'll kind of go over here to the good or the bad. And I really want to place emphasis on that. Like, I actually don't dislike being an outlier. In fact, I would argue that if you are an adaptive, resilient, mindful, agile individual, being the outlier and having that actualization of is actually very powerful, because it's, if I actualize that I'm the outlier in this data set, and I am able to recognize that, and what I can do is compare, hey, this is where I am, this is who I am, this is what I'm trying to be, this is where I'm trying to go, whatever have you. Like, do I have like the KSAOs, knowledge, skills, abilities, or other traits to become this? Or do I even want to? Do I need to, right? Like, let's say these are all millionaires, right? And I'm a millionaire too. Why am I over there? By the way, I'm not. Maybe one day. So with that, I kind of want to come down here to thoughts. And the other thing that I'm kind of going with this is, like, I don't know how many times, and I'm sick of it, being in a room, whatever group or cohort, and the leader or whoever is like running it likes to be like, oh, you're all alphas. Like, that is the biggest logical fallacy, because I guarantee, depending on the scale and scope of the data and how it's processed and analyzed and the inferences that come about it, there is going to be an outlier. Because, like, if you Google Earth this, right, in and out, you compare it to like a shot group, like, you're going to have some flyers, unintended, figuratively speaking. So I really want to place an emphasis on this alpha stuff, because if you think you're an alpha, they're like, maybe. I think the importance is you have to be the alpha when it's required. You gotta have to know when to, like, turn it up to 11, right? What is that referred to? What movie? That amp. They got one more. You have to know when to alpha, and I wouldn't even say like beta, but like there's a time and place to turn it up, because you can't have it up all the time, and that's how you reach burnout. I'm guilty of that. I'm sure most of you are too, because when you find like your passion or whatever, if you're passionate about cooking and they're doing a bunch of research, and you're the only one that's passionate about cooking or baking or whatever have you, and no one else is, like, you will be the outlier, and there's nothing wrong with that. Being the outcast is not bad. And so with that, in closing, where I want to go with this is, where do you feel comfortable at? Do you believe in what you're doing? Do you feel like kind of awkward? Do you take the time to kind of intuitively sense, analyze, process, look in the mirror and say, hey, I know I'm over here, but that's okay. I'm not trying to be here. If I need to, I can make some changes. And when I talk about changes, it doesn't mean you have to change the fiber, the molecular structure of who you are. But if you need to be a fair weather fan to fit in and enjoy the party, I don't think that's fake. I think that's like, yeah, I want to fit in, but still be this person. And so, for example, I'm an Ohio State fan, and we like to say OHIO. Now, if this Outlier's a Michigan fan, I think they're just kind of stuck. But where I'm getting with that is you can adapt to your situation. I'm currently in Germany, and so if this data set was who speaks German fluently, I would need a lot bigger paper, and I would be way over here, because I like to say ich spreche ein bisschen Deutsch, oder einfach Deutsch, or I call it caveman German. It's very simple, but it's effective enough. A side note, Dingsbums. If you know Dingsbums, you can get by anywhere. So that's all I have there. Thank you for following, listening to my mind a little bit on a colorful space. And here we go. You can see it. I found an outlet on the floor, live studio audience here in the Flughafen of Germany, Stuttgart specifically. All right, this is Renaissance Chick. Always an outlier. Messes are signs of life. Till next time, thank you for tuning in. Out.